We are going to talk about very interesting topics as part of the Advanced Pediatric Endocrinology Symposium. This is being organized under the banner of Mediclasses, Growth Society and Regency Hormone with support from Novo Nordisk. So we started off with pediatric endocrine awareness using workshops, and around 2011 we started the practical pediatric endocrine course. Then we conducted workshops across the country. We had a workshop in Patna also, I think 10 years ago. Then we had got PPC across the country. In Jaipur we conducted. Then we realized that just doing workshop, it will require a huge amount of time and other factors. So we started on more of awareness programs on social media and YouTube channels. Then we started our on-site fellowship, that is 2017. And then we started the online program because that will give more access to people across the country. And now we have the mobile application, we have got the online fellowship programs, the other factors which are available in that regards. So over the last 10 years, we actually, when there was no COVID, we used to have every month one program here and there. And we had got huge number of practical courses, workshop across the country. But now, good or bad or whatever, we've got more of online activities which are there. And this time we have a hybrid program. So the first Advanced Pediatric Endocrinology Symposium happened in 2017. I think Dr. Sanjay and Dr. Pradeep were both there in that program. Dr. Amit was also there in that program, and Dr. Hemchand, who is part of this program, also was part of that program at that time. 2 years back, we had another big program with our on-site course, which was in 2019. Again, many of our friends were there, Dr. Pragya and a lot of other friends. Dr. Pratik was also there at that time. Then last year, we did it more in an online mode, and today it's a hybrid mode. So all of you can access our YouTube channel, which now has got a huge number of videos on nearly every topic of pediatric endocrinology. You can access them from there. You can go to our website, which provides a lot of information and courses which are available, including fellowship programs, diploma programs for postgraduates. And we have got 3 specific exclusive grand rounds which happen on a complimentary basis. Every month we have one for advanced in a fellow or a pediatric endocrinology perspective, one for postgraduates. And recently we have started a postgraduate lecture series for postgraduates covering the basic topics in that regards. You can access our publication and our mobile application. We are happy to announce that it is the most downloaded endocrinology app in the whole world. It has already resulted in 3 publications, and there are many other publications which are on pipeline. So this is something which is becoming, and we are going to enhance it very soon dramatically, and we'll get many more interpretations coming out of that. Who is to set up a way in which we can use technology to link different clinics together, and to use technology to provide state-of-the-art guidance in terms of immediate care, management, research, and all those factors. But most important tool is what we call PI, which will be a personalized, intelligent, state-of-the-art EMR. So what it will do is that based upon the basic inputs that the doctors will give, it will use AI, multiple factors, and then try to come out with the likely diagnosis, investigations. A lot of things will come up immediately. Diet charts will come up immediately. So how it will work is that if you put a particular complaint, your field will come up like short stature. You will have some questions on history and examination. Immediately you can assess bone age. Immediately you can assess puberty. Once you do that and put analyze button, you will get a summary like this. A lot of app outputs will now directly come out immediately on the press of the button. The bone age will come like a proper report. So you will, which sites you have selected, what was the basis and what was the bone age was there will come immediately. And very importantly, based upon the weight, the BMI, the diet preference, the disease, we will make a 7-day diet chart.
At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Anurag sir for the kind invitation to speak on an important topic of hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia. So as general pediatricians and neonatologists, we often come across cases in neonates with hypoglycemia and hyperinsulinism being an important cause of hypoglycemia in these neonates. As compared to other causes of hypoglycemia, hyperinsulinism is associated with non-ketotic or hypoketotic condition, thereby at the same level of blood glucose, neonates with hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia are at a greater risk of neurological damage as compared to those neonates who have ketones available as a spare fuel for the brain. So my talk will be focused mainly on the early identification of hyperinsulinemia as the cause of neonates so that these neonates can be managed at an earlier time period. So to begin with, we have this case of a 14-day boy who was admitted in the neonatal ICU as a case of birth asphyxia. During hospital stay, we encountered a blood sugar of 28 milligrams per dl or 1.4 millimoles per liter, even at a glucose infusion rate of 14 mg per kg per minute. So if we think as hyperinsulinemia as a cause of hypoglycemia in this neonate, as the glucose infusion requirement was very high, that is way beyond 10 mg per kg per minute, we first need to assess as what are the effects of insulin on our physiology. So insulin, as we know, is a hormone secreted from the beta cell of the pancreas. It has a role in increasing the deposition of glucose in the liver by stimulating the synthesis of glycogen synthase and inhibiting the enzyme phosphorylase. By these two mechanisms, it causes increased deposition of glycogen in the liver, leading to hepatomegaly. Simultaneously, it also inhibits lipolysis, leading to low ketone production in the blood. It stimulates via GLUT4 transporter and causes increased fat mass. Also, there is an increased deposition of glycogen in the liver, thereby administration of glucagon helps in the release of glucose from this glycogen, which is known as the glucagon response test, which we will be talking about subsequently. And it is an indicator of hyperinsulinism. Also, insulin acts on the IGF-1 receptor, leading to growth. And we often see macrosomia in infants of diabetic mother, which is due to the stimulation of this IGF-1 receptor, secondary to increased insulin levels in blood. Insulin, via acting on the sodium-potassium ATPase channel present on the cell membrane, causes movement of potassium intracellularly, leading to hypokalemia in the blood. So, to summarize, ketones being the first blood investigation in cases of hypoglycemia play an important role in differentiating the causes. So if the ketone level is low or absent, the three important causes we need to think about are galactosemia, fatty acid oxidation defect, and hyperinsulinemia. So if we look at the non-glucose reducing substance in the urine, if it is present, it indicates galactosemia as the cause of hypoglycemia, while in its absence, we need to do insulin levels, which, if detectable, point towards hyperinsulinism, while no insulin in the blood in the presence of hypoglycemia point toward fatty acid oxidation defects. Now, we need to emphasize that detectable insulin in the presence of hypoglycemia in itself is a pointer towards hyperinsulinism. On the other hand, if the ketones are present or it is a ketotic hypoglycemia, then the second blood investigation to be done is lactate levels, which, if high, point towards a possibility of glycogen storage disorder type 1. And if it is normal, we need to assess the organomegaly in the neonate, in the presence of which a possibility of other types of GSD such as 3 and 6 should be considered. While if there is no organomegaly, an important cause to rule out is multiple pituitary hormone deficiency, and therefore growth hormone and cortisol level need to be considered in such scenarios. Even if the growth hormone cortisol levels are normal, then a possibility of accelerated starvation comes into picture. So coming back to our newborn, when we investigated, we found that it was a case of hypoketotic hypoglycemia because the ketones were far below the cutoff of 1.8. Insulin levels were high, and the birth weight was 1.6 kg. So birth weight in itself is an important differentiating clinical pointer toward the causes of hyperinsulinemia, such as if there is an antenatal exposure of insulin level in the fetus, it will lead to macrosomia. While if we are suspecting hyperinsulinemia in a baby who is appropriate or small for gestational age, then environmental causes such as asphyxia, sepsis needs to be considered. So this case is clearly a case of hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia because of the high requirement of glucose infusion and non-ketones. So is it really hyperinsulinism? Now, coming on to the criteria, it definitely fulfills the criteria for diagnosis of hyperinsulinism. There were low ketones, less than 1.8. The glucagon response test showed the elevation of blood glucose more than 30, and the insulin levels were certainly more than 2 or in the detectable range. So taking the second case, we have a 6-day-old girl who was admitted with birth weight of 3.4 kgs and had hypoglycemia. So as we discussed, ketones being the first blood investigation, we did blood ketone and it was in the hypoketotic range. The second blood investigation as per the algorithm was the non-reducing substance in urine, which were negative. So we were left with hyperinsulinemia and fatty acid oxidation defect as the causes. We further proceeded and found that insulin was in the detectable range. But interestingly, we also note that the growth hormone and cortisol levels were low in this baby. So the two possibilities that come to our mind was that are we dealing with a primary multiple pituitary hormone deficiency with a stress-induced hyperinsulinism, or are we dealing with a primary hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia with secondary exhaustion of the counter-regulatory hormones? So this is a common dilemmic situation which we often come across in the neonatal practice. So how do we decide the diagnosis in such a dilemmic cases? So coming back to the criteria, we see that insulin above 2 microunits per ml has a sensitivity of 82%, that is 18 cases out of 100 are still there which may have insulin below the detectable range, but they are still does not exclude the possibility of hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia. So apart from these normal blood parameters, C-peptide, ketone, and glucagon response, the other indirect indicators of hyperinsulinemia are low IGF-BP1 level, which we do not do routinely. What we can do is measure the serum potassium. If it is a primary hyperinsulinemia as the cause of hypoglycemia, then potassium levels will be low because of the intracellular shifting of the serum potassium. A high glucose infusion rate also points towards primary hyperinsulinemic cause rather than a primary multiple pituitary hormone deficiency. So coming to this girl, a 6-day girl with hypoglycemia, birth weight 3,400 grams, hypoketotic. And we did the urine reducing substance, which was negative. Second, we did the insulin, which was detectable and with low growth hormone and cortisol levels. So to differentiate between the two, we did a glucagon response. And if the glucagon response was positive, which was in this case, it pointed towards a possibility of hyperinsulinism. So to summarize, a positive glucagon response, high glucose infusion requirement, low potassium level, non-ketones point toward a possibility of primary insulin excess rather than primary pituitary hormone deficiency. Coming on to our next case, we have a 3-day-old boy admitted with severe hypoglycemia. The birth weight was more, it was 4,600 grams. Glucose infusion requirement was way high at 18 mg per kg per minute and ketones were undetectable. So further workup gave us an insulin level of 2.4, which was in the detectable range. So to differentiate between the causes of high insulin or hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia, first we need to know whether is it an increased insulin level or are we dealing with increased insulin action. So increased insulin levels can either be due to congenital causes or acquired causes. Among the congenital causes, we frequently come across the transient causes which we see in maternal diabetes, RH incompatibility, use of some maternal drugs such as sulfonylurea or beta blockers propranolol. In cases of small for gestational age babies and asphyxia due to the production of hypoxia-inducible factor 1, we may see cases of prolonged hyperinsulinemia in which hypoglycemia may persist for a few weeks to months. Then there are certain monogenic causes. These genes are involved in the insulin synthesis, production, secretion, regulation. Defect in any of these genes can be a cause of permanent hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia requiring either a long-term treatment or surgical intervention. Next, we have syndromic causes, common among which are the Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, Turner syndrome, and Kabuki syndrome. Among the acquired causes, the most common one needs to rule out is the exogenous administration of insulin, such as in cases if the children have easy access to insulin, if the sibling or parent have type 1 diabetes or are using insulin for type 2 diabetes. There can be certain causes such as insulinoma or autoimmune causes. After we have ruled out whether it is an increased insulin level or increased insulin action that we are dealing with, we need to assess the site of insulin problem. And then third, we are left with the final cause of insulin excess. So to differentiate and delineate the causes, we need certain clinical pointers and laboratory markers. Among the clinical pointers, birth weight, as I already described, is an important differentiating parameter. So if there is an antenatal exposure to insulin, such as in cases of potassium ATP defects, Beckwith-Vietnam syndrome, or HNF1 and 4 alpha, then the birth weight is high because of the effect of insulin on insulin growth factor 1, leading to macrosomia. If the birth weight is low, then environmental causes such as asphyxia and small for gestational age babies should be considered, and hypoglycemia in these babies persists for weeks to months, leading to prolonged hyperinsulinism. Birth weight can be normal in monogenic causes such as glutamate dehydrogenase, glucokinase, or uncoupling protein defect, or monocarboxylase transporter defect. So to summarize, the transient causes can be maternal exposure to drugs such as beta blocker and terbutaline, RH incompatibility, infant of diabetic mother. Prolonged cases can be seen in asphyxia, SGA, preterm, or cardiac illness. And Beckwith-Vietnam syndrome can be recognized by a careful examination for omphalocele, ear creases, and hepatomegaly. GDH defect, a difficult condition to diagnose, can be identified if there is a protein-induced hypoglycemia with high ammonia levels, although the level of hypoglycemia is mild in such cases. Point to emphasize here is that although the ammonia levels are high, it does not require a separate treatment. Apart from clinical markers, functional imaging is also required in cases of diazoxide unresponsiveness and in cases of Beckwith-Vietnam syndrome, where we want to differentiate between the focal and the diffuse causes. The imaging used is fluorodopa PET scan along with a CT scan. Its role, as I told, is to differentiate between focal and diffuse cases so that we can plan for surgical resection according to the involvement of pancreas. The third most important investigation of choice here is the genetic workup, which is indicated if we are thinking about permanent causes in cases with diazoxide non-responsiveness. Those who do not respond to diazoxide, genetic workup becomes urgent to rule out potassium ATP defects and whether the mother, father, or which parent lineage is involved, as it differentiates or helps to differentiate between the focal and diffuse causes. In diazoxide sensitive cases, the molecular workup is important to differentiate whether it is a GDH, SCAD, or glucokinase defect, and it helps in the prognosis and future counseling of the family. So to summarize the approach to a case of hyperinsulinism after the ruling out the clinical causes of transient and prolonged hyperinsulinism, if we are thinking of transient and prolonged cases, the first thing to manage is with the dextrose infusion and diazoxide. If there is a diazoxide responsiveness, then one needs to continue with the diazoxide treatment, the dose being 5 to 15 mg per kg per day. In milder cases, we start with 5 and escalate to 10, while in severe cases, it is better to start with a higher dose of 10 and gradually adjust the doses. Second blood investigation that points towards glutamate dehydrogenase is to get ammonia levels. So if ammonia is high in the presence of hypoglycemia, and if we see that there is a protein-induced hypoglycemia, then we should consider for glutamate dehydrogenase defect. In the absence of diazoxide response, the investigation of choice becomes a genetic study to rule out potassium ATP defects, which forms a major chunk of hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia in prolonged or persistent cases. Those with autosomal recessive transmission are more likely to have a diffuse involvement in which a palliative surgery or octreotide infusion needs to be considered while the child is awaiting for surgery. Secondly, in paternal defects or Beckwith-Vietnam syndrome, fluorodopa PETs helps to delineate the lesions into focal and diffuse, allowing for surgical planning. So coming through some cases to help assess and manage the child with hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia, we have this 2-day-old girl who was admitted with seizures. She had blood glucose of 24 at the time of admission. The next investigation as per the algorithm is blood ketones, which were low, reducing substances, which were negative, and so we did the insulin levels, which were high. The birth weight was 4,400 grams, and she was a large for gestational age baby. So this was a classical case of infant of diabetic mother. But the blood sugars were never done during the antenatal period. She was a poor follow-up mother. So we did a HbA1c level and found that the HbA1c level was high and it was 8%. So in the absence of history of diabetes in the mother, but if there is a strong clinical suspicion of infant of diabetic mother based on the clinical and laboratory parameters, then assessment of HbA1c in the mother becomes crucial. Second case is of a 14-day boy admitted in ICU with birth asphyxia with hypoglycemia, high GII requirement, detectable insulin, non-ketotic hypoglycemia, and birth weight was low. So as we already discussed, that low birth weight points that it was not an antenatal exposure to insulin, but is a environment or stress-induced response, such as in cases of asphyxia, cardiac illness, small for gestational age babies. Glucagon response was done in this baby and it was positive, pointing towards hyperinsulinemia as the cause of hypoglycemia. Third, we have a 3-day-old boy admitted with severe hypoglycemia, large for gestational age baby with very high glucose infusion requirement, hypoketotic, detectable insulin levels. So a possibility of potassium ATPase channel defect was considered in this baby and he was started on diazoxide. In follow-up, we found that even at a dose of 10 mg per kg per day, hypoglycemia was persisting and the dose was increased to 15. But still, there was no response and hypoglycemia was persisting. So if we say that it was a diazoxide unresponsive case, then we began glucagon infusion and simultaneously we sent for genetic analysis and we found that it was a case of potassium ATP defect with diffuse involvement or autosomal recessive transmission, and a total pancreatectomy was considered in this case with gastrojejunostomy tube inserted for feeding. Next, we have a 10-day boy admitted with hypoglycemia. Birth weight was high, but not as high as the earlier case. Glucose infusion was high at 13. Ketones were borderline low and insulin was detectable. So hypoketotic hypoglycemia with high GIR and detectable insulin level points toward hyperinsulinemia. So again, diazoxide was started and in follow-up, we found that there was no improvement in the blood glucose at a diazoxide of 10 mg per kg per day. And on genetic analysis, a paternal ATP defect was found. Majority of the cases of paternal ATP defect are associated with a focal disease, which was confirmed on F-TOPA PET scanning, and the child was referred for surgery. Next, we have a 15-day-old girl admitted with hypoglycemia with a birth weight of 3,200 grams, high GII requirement, borderline low ketotic hypoglycemia, detectable insulin levels. So it was a case of hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia, and the diazoxide was started. So on follow-up, we found the clinical improvement was there on a diazoxide dose of 10 mg per kg per day. We were able to reduce the glucose infusion in this child, but what we detected was that the ammonia levels were quite high. So a possibility of glutamate dehydrogenase defect was kept here, which was confirmed on genetic analysis, and this child was diagnosed as a case of hyperinsulinemic hypoammonia syndrome secondary to glutamate dehydrogenase defect. Ammonia levels in these cases do not require any extra treatment, and these children are often associated with neurological complications which are also unrelated to the level of ammonia or to the severity of hypoglycemia. It is an independent defect because of the altered activity of GDH in the brain, which leads to altered levels of glutamate and GABA. Ammonia levels are high because of the effect of glutamate dehydrogenase defect on the renal tubules, which leads to increased production of ammonia. Next, we have a 12-day-old boy admitted with lethargy, with hypoketotic hypoglycemia, high insulin levels during the time of hypoglycemia, and birth weight was high. On clinical examination, we found umbilical hernia and ear creases, which pointed toward a possibility of Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, which is a defect on the short arm of chromosome 11. So to summarize the cases with increased insulin effect, these cases should be considered if there is a high glucose infusion requirement, ketone levels are low, which is less than 1.8, and there is a response to glucagon, which is a blood glucose rising more than 30 after giving a glucagon injection. As already discussed, very high insulin levels are not essential, as up to 18% of the cases may have low to normal insulin levels, but this does not exclude hyperinsulinism. Even A detectable insulin in the presence of hypoglycemia in itself is sufficient for the diagnosis of hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia. In cases of small for gestational age or asphyxia or cardiac illness or environmental stress, prolonged hyperinsulinemia up to weeks to months can be seen. And large for gestational age babies should be considered as having monogenic forms of hyperinsulinemia, as it points that there was an antenatal exposure to insulin because of a monogenic defect. Diazoxide is the trial key to management. So if there is a response to diazoxide, one needs to continue with the response and simultaneously assess the ammonia levels to rule out GDH defect. In the absence of diazoxide response, genetic analysis becomes crucial to identify the monogenic forms and plan for surgery based on the focal or diffuse involvement of the pancreas.
Which came out from what Neha was saying was that we need to look at multiple pictures, not just on one issue. Don't just look at insulin, look at the ketones, look at glucagon response, look at other factors. Look at birth weight very importantly, whether there is asphyxia or not, whether any drugs are there, and then start giving diazoxide. If it is a prolonged or persistent, give diazoxide. Only get worried if there is no response to diazoxide. Now, good part is that now diazoxide is available across India also. It's easily available now. So that is a good part, has been prepared by Indian company. What is the cost?
For 25 mg, 10 tablets around 1200.
Okay. We'll give the details on that. Yeah. Yeah.
Should be worked out for genetic.
Yes. So as we said, if there is a response to diazoxide, the only thing you can look at is ammonia. If the ammonia is high, that will suggest like a HeHa syndrome. If there is a response to diazoxide, continue. And what we generally do, there's that patient who had come with high ammonia in the onset discussion also. What we usually do is that we continue diazoxide for some time and we try to taper out later on. Now, genetic diagnosis is not going to change your management. You will need to continue diazoxide. So it is not essential. Where it is essential is diazoxide resistant cases where you have to definitely go ahead and do a genetic test to identify potassium ATP defect coming from the father. If it is coming from the father, this is like a focal disease. Then you do a imaging and you can take it out, the child will be fine. So genetics is important, but not everybody in that regard. We can decide about that. Some of them are autosomal recessive. So though that will be a more of a issue from a prospective factors from that perspective, but definitely not routinely. But of course, if you have a diagnosis, is always better. So now NGS, we'll talk about endocrine genetics in that regards, but then definitely it won't change your management for this child usually.
The critical samples, how should be stored?
Yes. So generally speaking, the most important critical sample which should be immediately processed, I would say would be ketones, most important. Reducing substances, number 2. Third will be cortisol and insulin and growth hormone. Growth hormone may or may not be initially important, but cortisol and insulin, these you can process immediately. Other things like lactate. So usually we say if you keep it in 2 to 8, most cases you will get the result. In our center, we get these results back quickly because we have an in-house lab. So we get insulin quickly. Ketone is immediate. So point of care, that will anyway tell you which way you're going to. If ketone is positive, then more of growth hormone, cortisol become more important and lactate becomes important. Ketone negative, still do a growth hormone, cortisol, but insulin is the most likely and reducing substance. So I would say point of care ketone meter is the most important thing. It will tell you which test to do, and unnecessary workup can be stopped, because if there is no ketones, why do organic acids, why do lactate and so many things? So this will be there.
How long do we need to give diazoxide for these people?
If it is genetic, they will require lifelong. Otherwise, if it is prolonged hyperinsulinism, our experience is around 6 to 12 weeks. They will go off diazoxide after that. Glucagon and octreotide, these are all temporary measures, but then they have side effects. So octreotide can cause significant problem like necrotizing enterocolitis and other factors, cholestasis. Glucagon also can have skin rash and other factors. So these are for 1 or 2 times you can use it, but not as a proper treatment. Diazoxide is the best treatment, and now it is available. It's cheaper, it's oral, so everything is better from that perspective. So in that setting, normally what you expect that if you are having hypoglycemia, your glycogen should have been exhausted. So if you give glucagon, there should be no response in anybody. But if you have insulin excess, that is the only condition in which you will have response to glucagon. So you give 30 microgram per kg of glucagon and see if the glucose rises by more than 30 milligram per dl. So if there is a rise, glucagon, you can give IM. It's an injection. So you can give, usually we give IM or subcutaneous that is available on that.
Cost of paracetamol, sir?
Around 900. So it is very good for type 1 patients, but the same you can use for a test.
Check glucose after how much time?
Around 30 minutes. Usually there will be a rise on that.